When you lose a deal, it's because the customer saw more value in the alternative solution than yours. And that alternative could be another product. It could be something they build in-house. It could be just doing nothing. The cost of inaction, what's the cost of doing nothing? If it's not great to the customer, why would I do that now? I mean, if I was flush with cash, maybe I would do it. But if the cost of doing nothing is not, the pain isn't big enough, then I'm not going to do it.
Today, we have got a great episode for you where we are talking about business value, selling in 2024, the importance of leading and selling with value. And our guest today, Doug May, Chief of Staff to the CRO at Datadog, absolute sales legend. He's worked at companies like BMC, Splunk, Databricks. And today we're talking about not only the importance of business value and selling business value, but actually how to craft 7-figure deal winning business value assessments that have led to massive deals. Doug's going to break it all down for us. Without further ado, let's get into it. Doug, welcome to the Elite Selling Podcast. How's it going today? Happy Friday.
Oh, happy Friday. Oh, it's fantastic. It's great to be here. Love what you guys are doing with this podcast. Had some great people, great stories, and you're all doing it with another day job. So kudos to you.
Today, we are talking about business value. And as we were just, again, prepping for the podcast, talking about where we could take this conversation, I know this is something you've been passionate about for a long time. So rather than focusing on sort of how you got started, what Frankie and I would love to do is just learn a little bit more about what you're seeing out there in the field today in January 2024. A lot of sellers heading into a new fiscal year. Would love for you to just kind of lay out what kind of the current state looks like and why this should be on every seller, sales leader's mind as we head into the new, many of us head into the new fiscal year.
It's a great point. The beginning of the year, it's a reflection, right? We're looking back on last year. We're thinking about, hey, I was a little short of my goal, or I want to change something different this year. I would absolutely encourage any seller out there to think about business value and how you weave it into your selling process. There's many sort of macro factors that make this really important. I'd say the first is, the economy. And while, we talk about, last year was rough, we started to come out of it. I still hear companies talking about reducing spend, laying people off. So the number of things they're going to spend money on, that list is shorter. And when the list is shorter, you have to work harder as a seller to get your project, your deal up that list. And the way to do that, one great way to do that, I should say, is to really focus on the business impact of the solution. It gets even more sort of complex in 2024, where, with cloud products, cloud consumption, the ease of engaging with a product nowadays, PLG has really changed the world, where all the friction of starting to use a product has been removed, or most of it. You basically need a name and an email, and you can almost use any product that's out there. So for sellers, we get a little bit, not sure if it's fair to say lazy. We're always looking for the fast path to the deal. So great. Hey, look at these accounts that just opened. The usage has started. Let me call on them and I'll try to, slam dunk a deal. And the reality is that's a great strategy. It really is. I mean, someone who's actually committing to sign up and use the product is a good indicator of there being a problem or a challenge. And I think what happens is we can't let that be the only thing that they use to determine if they're going to commit to that product for a long time. You got to find out as a seller, what's the problem that brought them to the site to actually download the product, or to create the account and go. The next thing you got to figure out is, how big of a problem is that inside the organization? Is it one person who has a struggle and they want to use something? Is it perpetuating across many people? If they say it's developers who are, trying to test code better or secure code or launch code faster, are there hundreds of them? Are there 5 of them? Sort of, you need to understand the scope of that pain. And then still, even if you came to someone and said, hey, we have this solution that's really going to help your developers. We can give you back 30, 40% of your productivity. They still might say, so what, when you get to the decision-making level. And that decision-making level is going to be different in every organization. I think I've typically used that benchmark of $50,000 to $100,000 in annual spend. If that mark is hit, you really, as a seller, need to be thinking, I got to have an anchor. I've got to be able to explain to the person who's not using the product why it's so important and why it's important to do now. And that link comes from quantifying the potential impact, but also the other part of it is linking it to something really important and urgent in the company. Public companies do an amazing job of telling you what's important to them. They have annual reports, they have investor days and presentations where they list their top 10 initiatives. So as a seller, as an, at an enterprise level, you can be going to those websites, pull down the investor day deck, and in there is so much gold that you can target. You can build your hypothesis, you can build your outreach communications, and you're going to have a really incredible message. What you can also do is, if you've got someone using your product already on a trial basis, you can ask them, hey, I read about this particular initiative you have around bringing new products to market faster. Is that why you're looking at this, solution to help your developers be more productive? And when you can glue those two things together and prove the linkage, as the decision moves up the organization, from the developer who started and created the account to use your product to the management of the developers, first line, second line, ultimately perhaps to a CFO or a CIO or CTO, you now have the ability to speak to each level in the organization around the challenge, what it's costing them, and what it will mean to close the gap with your solution, and why it's important to invest now. Because I think that last piece is, and you all know the 3 whys really well, but it's like, why do it now? Create the urgency. It's on your top 5 list of initiatives for the company. It's got quantifiable business value, and you've proven it out. Now you've got a rock solid case to get it done.
One thing I wanted to dig into a little bit more, I want to dig into everything, but one thing that stood out is the why now. I think we all know the importance, or we at least know the base level of importance on building the value, quantifying it. I do want to go into each of those, and Griffin and I both do. But talk to us about the why now. Like, how do you avoid it slipping quarter after quarter or into the next year? Let's go into that a little bit more.
For sure. I mean, and I'm not trying to ever say that I didn't have a deal that slipped. I had plenty of them that slipped. I learned this sort of the hard way, as a lot of us do. And I know you're trying to share the best practices to help people avoid that quarter and that, shame that you have when you promised the deal and couldn't bring it in. The way I look at it is, when you lose a deal or a deal pushes, basically value is the reason. And I'll explain. So when you lose a deal, it's because the customer saw more value in the alternative solution than yours. And that alternative could be another product. It could be something they build in-house. It could be just doing nothing. The cost of inaction, what's the cost of doing nothing? If it's not great to the customer, why would I do that now? I mean, if I was flush with cash, maybe I would do it. But if the cost of doing nothing is not, the pain isn't big enough, then I'm not going to do it. Now, the other side of that is deals that push. And I remember, being part of various organizations where, there'd be a rep who'd bring that deal every quarter to the forecast. And oh man, I feel like once you do it twice, you should never be allowed to say that account name ever again until the paper is in and the contract is signed. But here's why the role that I think value plays in that scenario is, if you've connected it to something really important in a company, you get the support of executives, you get automatic urgency. And then, if you've also quantified that value, they know what the cost of doing nothing is. If you have a $12 million benefit that you can give to a customer, and then every month that they push that, they're losing $1 million. And if you've done a really good job as a seller articulating that, you can create urgency from that. So I think the combination of those two things are really unstoppable. So when the deal pushes, barring there being like an org change or they got acquired, I think those two things, you got to connect it to one of those top 5 pillars like we used in the Boston Scientific example. And then, they have to be able to see that the cost of doing nothing is worse than actually doing something, if that makes sense.
So let's break down the cost of doing nothing. Like I'm thinking tactically for our sales reps out there that might be listening, in a 30-minute discovery call that they have with a prospect coming up, that they've done their research, they're talking to a potential champion or maybe even the EB in a discovery call. What are some of the things that they also need to uncover in that discovery? They need to understand that maybe one of the top 5 pillars, all 5 of them, are where they think they can attach the cost of doing nothing. Like help us understand maybe some of the questions that a rep or even a sales leader with a rep should be asking a prospect to help get to that quickly.
I mean, it's interesting, right? The 3 whys that we use. I mean, I would ask those questions directly to my champion. Why would you do this now and not just wait 2 quarters? Have your champion defend the urgency. Have them explain it to you and say, that's great. Is that how your boss sees it? Is that how your CIO will see it? What if you ran into the CEO in the elevator and you said, would you mention this project? Would you, hey, we've got this opportunity to drive $12 million of new revenue because we're going to get our applications out faster? Like if you could say that and articulate that, and I've asked that question many times I didn't get an answer I liked. And many times the champion stepped up and gave me something that was gold. And that's, sort of the ultimate test, right? We want to know how the champion's going to represent this purchase opportunity in the account. So I think those questions are great. And I always also have this, I can almost get joy out of, maybe saying to the customer, like doing the takeaway. You're familiar with the takeaway, right? It's like, what, maybe you guys aren't ready for this right now.
Oh, that's good.
And then have them actually say, well, no, wait a minute. Actually, it's really important. And then say, well, why? Well, who cares? And how are you going to convince them? Should we put together the business case? Should we show them the cost of what it is means to be continuing in this way without making a decision? Now, the only way you can show them the cost of doing nothing is to understand the cost of doing something.
Mm.
And so if you, again, I use the example, if it's $12 million annual benefit that they could get, and you've quantified that with them, they validated that number, every month they wait, they lose $1 million. And you have to help them understand that it's not just you could get $12 million of benefit this year. It's if you don't, you're losing $1 million a month. And those are both the same thing, but one hurts a heck of a lot more than the other. And I think we know that people are more prone to act on pain than they are on gain.
Yeah. And again, it needs to be that $12 million can't just be some arbitrary number. It needs to be attached to one of those 5 initiatives like we've been talking about. So that's a really good point.
Well, and it can't be a number that,
right,
me and the SE cooked up using some marketing stuff or a customer success story and said, hey, these guys got 12 million, you could get 12 million too. The reality is it's got to be validated inside the organization. The inputs that you're using to quantify have to come from the customer. When you show the calculation to the customer has to say, yes, I agree with that, or hey, that number's too big, let's lower that. As soon as they start editing your calculation, it's a beautiful thing because now their fingerprints are on it, they own it, and you have tested the champion successfully, and now they're going to go defend because now their name's on it.
Yeah, you want them to redline it with you. Let's talk about the importance of building value throughout the entire cycle. Most people and most sales organizations just have like the business value or ROI, in stage 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever it is. And I used to think that way, where it's okay, I'm doing my thing, and then all of a sudden it's this business value conversation. And there is a moment in time where you do it, but I think what we miss is not doing the things throughout the cycle. So tell us how you get the inputs, whether it's on the first call, second call, lunch. Like, how are you always thinking about this as a seller and as a sales leader?
Yeah, great question. I agree with you. People always ask, because I've built the value teams, like, hey, when's the best time to engage you guys? what stage, what criteria needs to be met? And I said, yeah, first of all, value is applicable in every stage of the process. And so what I would say is at the beginning, prior to even calling the customer, reaching out to the customer, we're just like we talked at the beginning, we're investigating the account to determine what is important to them, what is valuable to them. And that's those 5 initiatives. And so if I can understand what those 5 initiatives are before I ever reach out to the customer, I'm using value to determine what's important so that my outreach can hit the mark and I've got a high chance of conversion to get that conversation, to get that first meeting. So that's how you use it at the beginning. Once you're in the first meeting, you're asking the customer probably some technical questions about their environment, and you want to understand how it's working. Are they having challenges? What's in their way? What do they wish they could do that they're not doing today? But this then comes down because they'll give you something. You'll find some nugget of pain, and you'll ask them, well, why does that matter to the organization? Why is that a problem? And they say, well, if we have to do these things manually, it just takes us a while, and I'd like to not be scripting. I'd rather be like pushing code automatically or something like that. Good argument. It's like, okay, well, how much of your time are you spending manually doing this? And then, oh, 20-30% of your time. Oh, that's a lot of time. How many others are doing that in your organization? So even literally in a discovery call, you can be capturing the metrics that are going to become the critical inputs to your business case. In that example, how many developers, what percentage of time they're spending scripting. And then I might ask them, it's like, well, how much are you trying to get rid of all scripting? Is it possible to get rid of all the scripting, or are there only, there's like 80% of that you'd wish to get rid of? And if they say, yeah, it's 80%, because we have some really hairy custom things that we have going to have to script, there's no tool that's going to help us. And you go, okay, fine. Now I've got 80% times the number of developers times 30% of their time times the number of hours they work in a week, extrapolate out for the year times their fully loaded cost, and boom, I can build a business case, be it albeit preliminary, after the first call. Didn't require us to do a BVA. It required me to listen. And when the customer talked about the challenge, great, I'm taking a note, I've got the challenge listed, and that's a technical challenge. Now I'm digging into, why does that matter to the business? Who cares? Why do they care? How big is it? And is it something that's going to link to the top 5 things in the company so that we can go get money together, that we can help you be successful? And I think this is where, if sellers were attuned to this early on in a sales cycle, you'd never do a BVA, number one. It would be part of the process. It's integrated from the beginning. The other thing is, you're validating the champion like from the first call, not sort of like 2, 3, 4 calls in, talking to your manager, who's the potential champions that we have here? How am I going to test them? It would have been done already. They've given you the numbers. And then the key part is, once you get that in a discovery call, you've got to send it back to them and you've got to read it out. Hey, thanks for the time. Here's what I heard you say. You had these challenges. They're causing this problem. You said this many other people have them. You're spending this much time, and here's the percentage you think you'd like to get rid of. And that's going to equal this many hours or people or dollars. Did I understand you right? First call, the first discovery call, you could get to that place. Now, of course, they're going to want to see your product, and they're going to probably want to test it, and all those things have to happen. But you now know whether or not you've got a great deal to work on, or whether, if you don't get those metrics, you're just going to use a little bit of hope that you're going to do a few more calls, and in a demo, something might click, or in a POV, something might click. But you can get those all up front.
I love your recommendation to sellers to make sure you send that in a follow-up email to say, look, here's what we just talked about. One thing just tactically that's helped me a lot is I always ask, hey, do you mind if we record this call? I'm going to be presenting. I'm not going to have enough hands to present and take notes. So it's really helpful for me just to have notes. 9 times out of 10, it's totally fine. And what that does is I can go back into my discovery and find, okay, verbatim, this is exactly what you said. It's on record, right? So just to keep track of everything, to know that, okay, this is exactly the challenges that they had. This is what it's leading to. Like you said, here are some of the metrics, so we can keep track of this, so that, just through the sales cycle, we know the challenges that are top of mind.
Absolutely. When
Yeah.
I started selling, I didn't have that benefit. There was no Zoom record option. And what I had to do was basically get my typing skills to the point where I could probably moonlight as a court stenographer.
Yeah.
It's like typing as fast as possible. Like, oh yeah. And so like I was at the point, I probably still am, where as we're speaking, I can almost type exactly what you're saying. And then you just got to be working the brain at the same time. Wait, what question do I want to ask based on what they just said? And I
Mm-hmm.
think this idea of active listening,
Mm-hmm.
if you're familiar with it, is the most critical skill that great sellers have.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, it's the cocktail party analogy. And I've taught this to a lot of people, and we've even done the exercise where we simulated a cocktail party. You meet somebody new, you ask them, oh, where are you from? Oh, how do Bill or Susan? Like, wherever event you're at, you do discover, you hear their answer. Oh, I'm from this neighborhood. Oh, really? I grew up there too. Do you know so and so? So there's this natural conversational interaction. What we do as sellers too often, because we're taught about products, is we're taught discovery questions. We get the answer, then we go to the next discovery question. And when the customer gives you the answer, there's usually gold in it, and it requires more digging. It might not be exactly what you want, but it'll trigger something. It might say, hey, we had this problem last month. We had an outage, and you write down a note. Oh yeah, we have outages, but you should stop right there and say, well, wait a minute. Tell me more about that outage. What happened? How did you learn about it? What was impacted? How many people were on the call trying to fix it? How long did that take? Did you guys estimate the cost? Like, how many customers were impacted? All of this comes from a genuine curiosity that people have.
Yeah.
And it's triggered by the listening matched with the curiosity. If you do those two things, like, you're just going to get so much out of it. And again, I think maybe it's not fair to call it a cocktail party skill, but it is a cocktail party skill. And most people can do that because we're human beings. But a
Frankie,
seller,
did you hear what Doug just said? Were you active listening? Did you write that down?
Oh man.
We got to work on Frankie's active listening. I see him spacing out.
I'm
Like,
terrible at asking questions. Well, I think it's great because it takes the pressure off sales. Like we overcomplicate everything in sales, right? Like we're sitting here talking about all these inputs that you need, and in order to have this big, BVA event to go close a $12 million worth of value deal, which is all important. But if you just simplify it, like you're saying, it's really, you're not asking groundbreaking questions. You're just saying, why does that matter to the business? How does that impact the people you work with? What's the cost of doing this or not doing anything? And you're just, the term I heard is just sitting in the pain, right? You're sitting in
right?
the pain and you're going deeper and deeper. And I think about it as either the gold pick analogy where you strike the dirt, you go deeper, deeper, deeper till you hit the gold, and then that's the nugget, and then you can move on to the next thing.
Exactly.
Like, you should be okay with sitting in one topic for 20 minutes if it's worth it, versus going and trying to get like a bunch of surface level pain that's going to get you a $3,000 deal like we talked about at the beginning versus maybe a $3 million deal. So
Yeah. And one thing to go with that, while you've got the pick and the axe out and you're digging and you're sitting in that pain, one of the best ways to get like how important it is out is to ask, when was the last time that happened? So I've spent a lot of time in observability and security, and they talk a lot about incidents. So, if you think about it, well, great. Tell me about the last incident that was really hairy and you had a problem with it. And people will share and they'll open up. And again, they'll tell you how many people and how long. Oh, you wouldn't believe it. I think I was on a call once when I was at BMC with Morgan Stanley, and they said, "Oh yeah, and we had this one outage where our trading system went down." Now I'm sort of a naive individual. I'm like, "Oh, the trading system, that's one application." Wrong. That was 76 applications. So I asked them, like, why was that so complicated? Oh, well, it's 76 different applications that make up the trading system here at Morgan Stanley. And I was like, wow. So how many people were on that call? And by the time we went through the groups, we estimated 500 people were on a call for several hours. Now you start to think about we've got everyone from executives down to like, Unix admins and developers. And so you can estimate the average cost of a person and how much time. And before you know it, you can say, wow, that one outage, even just to troubleshoot it, cost you $1 million, let alone the customer impact. They couldn't trade. you didn't get your, transaction fees or commissions or whatever. Like, you just, like, when you get in there, use an example, like have them tell you a story. It
Mm,
makes it real. And I'll tell you what, this is even better. When you put that proposal together and you put it together with a story, which I'm going to presume we try to do. It's not just a quote. People buy $1,000 things on a quote, but $1 million things they don't buy with a quote,
right.
unless they're a longtime customer and all that stuff. But so you got to build a proposal, and that proposal should really sort of summarize what's happening strategically in the company, what is the current challenge they're facing. Insert the example right there. I would build a slide on the outage. I would make it look painful. So not only sitting in the pain, Frankie, while we're doing the discovery, but whoever was going to read this proposal or be in the room when we presented it, I wanted to make it real. Because sometimes, as you might imagine, executives will think about, oh, these developers, they're always complaining. They always want new tools. They all want this stuff like, just use what you got, just keep doing your job. I know we get that sometimes as sellers too, when we talk internally about the things we need. But if you had real example of the pain and a real example illustrated for the customer, the executive in that meeting ultimately will probably like grab their gut. Like, it will be hurt.
Mm,
It will physically hurt them to see 500 people on a call for 4 hours and it costs us $1 million. Like they don't want that to ever happen again.
yeah.
And
One
it's
of my
another way to
favorite
sort of get the
things
emotional part, get them bought in on that side. Sorry, go
to
ahead.
your point, no, I cut you off. One of my favorite things to do is to, like, let's say I was talking to you, put a headshot of Doug May's profile picture from LinkedIn, and then actually have quotes of you saying it. Of
Yeah,
here's what the problem was. You got to be
that's right.
careful with it because not everybody maybe wants to be exposed. But if you have gotten consent or you've got a good relationship, you can do it. So it's like just another layer of making it real.
So
Because
I
you,
used to do that in an
yeah,
anonymous way. I would put 12 quotes on a slide as a page in the proposal, like, this is what your people told me. And instantly, usually the exec in that room is going, oh, I know who said that. I know who said that.
right.
Or they're asking, hey, who said that? Um, I try not to get people in trouble. I don't, like if they say something controversial, but yeah, sometimes they want to know. And because here's the thing, the executive has their own go-to people. We talk about champions as people who have access to power and the authority, or not the authority, but the ability to influence the power. And so, the CIO or C level, like, coming in and asking who said those things is a good way to find out, like, who do they care about what they say. So you can find potential champions that way too.
The sphere of influence, right? Around
Yeah,
the EB, the CEO, the CFO, whoever's signing off, you got to know who's in their corner, who's in their foxhole, who do they trust?
exactly.
100%. So, Doug, let's take a let's press the pause button here. You mentioned BMC. I would love to take a little trip down memory lane back to
Sure.
2010. I think Frankie was taking some sales classes at Florida State around that time, playing lacrosse. I was riding the bench at LMU basketball, but you were making the transition from regional sales leader
Yep.
for BMC in the Northeast. And then you jumped in around, I think it was early 2010, into the business value consulting group. So that was when you sort of made that transition to really focus on business value. What was there an experience that you had that really turned you on as far as like your passion for the business value piece of this, or was it gradual? Talk to us a little bit about your transition.
Yeah, I mean, when you join any company, you sort of get a feel for what it's like, culture, the product, and the selling motion. One of the things that was so critical in the selling motion, it was, the Blade Logic team had been acquired by BMC, and largely the sales organization was Blade Logic led at that point. They had masterfully created something they called the the data center assessment, the DCA. Basically what the DCA was, it was a BVA. And they were training all the sellers, they were training all the managers on doing this. And then I bumped into a guy named Dick Thomas, also a former seller, sales leader, great guy. But he actually had transitioned out of sales leadership and was trying to build a group of, experienced sellers, experienced sales leaders who could execute on this process and train others. And I just thought of, like, this is the ability to have a bigger impact on more than 6 people. When I was a first line sales manager, I had 6 reps, and some of them were tremendous. I had the absolute joy and honor of having Lois Petty on my team, one of the greatest sellers from BMC days. She went on and did amazing things at Splunk as well. But like, I wanted to have an impact across 30, 40, 50, 100, sellers if I could. And this team really gave that opportunity to, and we were we could parachute into a deal. We could run that data center assessment slash BVA and build a beautiful output, which basically is the form of a business case. It's the reasoning for change. Everything from the big initiative this is tied to the current state challenges, how they want the future to look and all of that, the capabilities they need, and then of course the quantified value. And I saw some of the stories that Dick had put together as a result of his work, and I was just wowed by it. So I reached out and I'm like, I got to join you. I got to do this. And then with the support of Carlos Delatorre, who was running the East at that point, Carlos was like, yeah, go do that. And yeah, then I was sort of like on a plane to New York or Philly or Jersey somewhere, probably every week for a couple of years, maybe a year and a half or so, just doing BVA after BVA. And having a big impact across a lot of sellers. It's where I really got to spend time with Sean Walters. And so where now I'm at Datadog working for Sean. He's now the CRO. So, how not so much time goes by and people ascend in their career and remember the great experiences that they had with you. So that's a little bit of what happened. It was a big moment because I didn't think there was any other career for me as a seller or a sales leader. I thought it was just like, I got to become a CRO or otherwise I'm a loser. And so, but then I saw this ability to have impact across a lot of people, and that really got me excited. And so, yeah, I think that was pretty much it.
I think this is, probably one of the most important skills you can learn as a seller, right? It will increase your average sales price. It'll shorten your sales cycle. It'll help you become more accurate in your forecasting. It'll help you build better relationships. So there's just so many reasons to dig into this. But Doug, as we kind of close with the last few questions here, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you share with sellers as we move into the next fiscal year that we haven't covered today?
No, I think I guess maybe just one thing, which is, as equally daunting as a product can be to learn how to sell it, how it works, the competition, all the things that we're taught in our enablement. I know when you join Datadog, we have 25 plus products. It's sort of like you're looking at a mountain. People view the world of business value and this skill set as an equivalently sized mountain. And I simply don't believe that it is. I'm a sales guy. I did it. I know lots of salespeople who have made that transition, people who are absolute elite sellers, many who are CROs today, but many who are running other parts of the supporting go-to-market function. And they got it way back when they started, and they really, really understood it. So it's not that hard. The example I used around doing the research and how you run the discovery, what you listen for and what you ask for, you're a value seller right there. You don't need any training. You don't need to really know how to calculate NPV. Those calculators are online. They'll tell you what inputs you need, right? You don't have to look up the formula. You just put the number in. And so you can get the financial calculations done without being having a finance degree. But it's active listening. It's connecting it to the business. It's knowing what is most important to the customer. And if you get those things right, your win rates, so you talked about other metrics there, Frankie, all those are good and true. But frankly, it's the win rate. It's the win rate. So at Databricks with this program, we had a win rate increase when you engaged a value consultant and did a BVA 6 times greater. I think it was like 5.8, 5.9 times greater than if you didn't. We introduced a BVA tool and an online tool, and the impact there was 5.5 times greater. And that tool just simulated sort of a lot of the work that the BVC, the business value consultant, would do, but put it in the hands of a seller. And so all it really takes is open your mind to, almost like walk into the account and forget about your product. Walk in the account and you're a student, you're learning, you're asking questions and curious to learn about what's happening in your account. You've done some research, so you're smart. You have smart questions to ask. You don't have to ask them, hey, what's your revenue model? How do you make money? Hopefully you know that before you call the customer.
You better know that before.
Exactly. But so I think it's like, it's not the mountain you think it is. I guess attached to that, to finish it up, is people would ask me all the time at Splunk, at BMC, at Databricks, what's the magic list of questions I need to ask to do the BVA? And I absolutely refuse to build that list, because it's not a magic list of questions. If I give them questions, I'm not teaching them the skill. Like, the skill really is discovery, active listening, digging until your pick hits the gold, and then sitting in that moment, as you said, Frankie, and documenting it and reading it back out to them. So the thing that I've learned, and why this matters, the reason the win rates have gone up so much when you engage with value, you're doing your champion building and testing long before you ever get to a POV. You're doing that work early, which means you either qualify them out or you solidify them in.
There you go.
I don't forget to talk about the win rate. Go ahead, Chris.
Skyrockets. Doug, so if I want to message to the sellers out there, if you're lucky enough, you mentioned it, like if you're lucky enough to have a BVG team, right? Reach out.
Yep.
Like if you're
my gosh.
unsure of where to start, if you're looking up at the mountain of business value and you're afraid to get started, if you're lucky enough, reach out. Just say, hey, I want to grab time on the calendar to learn more about your role and how I can make your job easier. I'm the seller. What can I come to
Yep.
the table with that's going to make your job easier? So would love your take on maybe a good experience that you've had with a seller that is like, here's what good looks like. Or if there's a seller that you worked with, you don't need to name names. You can if you want, right? We can always edit it out if you want. But if there's anything negative, or a seller that came unprepared, obviously, like any recommendations you have for sellers out there to come prepared?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, there's a lot of great sellers that I've worked with. I'll give you a couple examples real quick. One who is a master, large account, opening, expanding. His name's Dan McBreen, world class. We worked together opening up Coca-Cola, and he was in every single BVA meeting that we ever did. Like when we were asking people those questions about how often and how many and tell me a story, he was in there, he was doing it with me. And here's why that's really important as a seller. So if you have a value consulting team that you can engage, you're lucky. And some people are like, oh, great, I'll just have them go in and I'm going to go off to another account. Don't stay in there with them, because you're going to internalize the stories. You're going to say, hey, John told me a story about this time where you were trying to, finish up the quarterly books and you couldn't do it on time. So you had to delay your earnings call, and, that made Wall Street a little uncomfortable. And as a result, your stock price dropped. Like, when you can know those stories as a seller, those pain stories related to value, you can win big. And Dan masterfully did that at Splunk. He was the number one rep at one point too. Like, just really, really, really great. Another rep, and I did mention his name once before, is Andy Hershey. Now, Andy was at Splunk almost 10 years. Andy missed his quota one quarter. He's a wizard and a master. He's now a CRO and very successful, leading others and teaching others. But it was that one quarter. Now, he tried to get a business case done with his champion. His champion said, no, we don't need it. We're good. And here's the thing. Don't always believe your champion. Sometimes they don't know what they need. And you need to test them. You need to say, are you sure? Because I've had an opportunity just like this before, and the guy I was working with, he went forward and he didn't get the money because the COO asked on the last day of the year, where's the business case? Let's not let that happen to us. Let's do the work. I'll make it easy for you. Like that sort of thing. Now, Andy, again, masterful career at Splunk, 10 years, missed one quarter. And he tried. He was doing the right things, but the champion sort of wouldn't let him, and all that. The last one I'll tell you about is who I think is another sort of elite seller is Gary Harris. Gary is now a sales leader at Databricks, killing it. But when Gary was a rep, and he was number one rep 2 years at Splunk while I was there, he plans way in advance and makes requests for resources, has everything documented. literally had a plan to close Sony at $30 million and was arranging resources 5, 6 months in advance. He had vision, he had his community working on the deal, and the fact that he planned it so far in advance, like he's just repeatedly closed massive deals and been wildly successful. So, and
Shout out,
the business
shout out
case,
to Dan, Andy,
yeah.
and Gary.
And by the way, with Gary, the business case was so good that the guy he worked on it with at Sony ultimately came to us and worked as a value consultant.
Oh wow.
It was amazing, right? So they loved the process and how it was able to how they were able to move an organization to make a decision. He loved it so much. He's like, I want to do that job.
What other resources would you recommend people to dive deeper into this? Any podcasts, any books, anything you recommend there?
It's a good question. I would say, I mean, there's certain people. I mentioned Dick Thomas before. Dick is a passionate, salesperson, sales leader, comes out of the PTC school, the John McMahon school of sort of selling and in that world, and became a value professional. Dick is truly remarkable when it comes to being able to thread the needle like through everything and really connect it all the way to the top thing. And in other words, and actually he's much better at getting it into the boardroom. So if you're working with, on projects or investments that are like board level spend, he's doing that analysis. He can get you in there. Like now he teaches people how to do this. But he's really a superstar in that area. Because he would analyze so deeply the annual reports and the financial statements and come with such a point of view that was so rich. Like you almost, if you ignored it as an employee in the company, you could be fired because the data was so good it needed to be reviewed at the board level. He's a master.
That's incredible.
I love it. So, some great recommendations. Doug, we'll wrap this the way we always wrap our podcast. This has been a great conversation, but we gotta ask, like we always do, how you would define an elite seller.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned a few names there, but I guess if I boiled it down, I mentioned about planning. Right? They plan. Account planning is one of the things that's really sort of viewed as by many, and this is my read, by many enterprise AEs as sort of like wasteful time. I'm going to build an account plan to make my manager happy, and then it's not important. The reality is that you need to build a plan. The plan needs to be alive. It's a living, breathing thing. You update it after every single call. You adjust your timelines. You adjust the needs. You adjust what you know about the situation. So it's really important to be planning in advance. Know what you want to get. The second thing I think they do really well, they know the customer's business. They know what's going on. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Were they number one and now they're number three, or vice versa? Are they getting competition from non-traditional sources? Is their share price dropping or falling? What are the drivers that are affecting that? Like they really understand what's happening so that when they're in that conversation and in that technical pain, they can bring it back to something that's important and ask if that is connected. The third thing I think they do is they multi-thread. And it's a new term I've picked up, but right, they've got multiple champions in the account, not one. I've had stories, tell you plenty of stories. I've had a champion who on the last day of the quarter had a heart attack and was in the hospital. And I had a sales rep who was considering like faxing it to the hospital, like because of the pressure that was coming from above on a deal right now. These are the things that can happen. We hope to God they never happen. But if you have multiple champions, you have multiple people to go to. Champions are always getting job offers too. They might leave the company. So you put in a lot of work with a champion, you build out a case, and then they leave. You have to start over. So start early and build multiple champions around your opportunities. I think I'll give you two more. Basically they always know when to get to the executive. I've been through selling methodologies that tell you to start there. I've had other people tell you to finish there. Like you need to understand your product and your motion. If it's PLG, like when is the best time? But these people intuitively know when the best time is to get the right leverage. So they have the right message to go to that person with, and then they're going to ask something from them, rather than just sort of, bring a story and hope they like it. Like they have that plan. And then lastly, obviously they always have a business case. Because they're doing all those things, and they know that somebody may come along. We have this saying, people buy rationally, but they justify. They buy emotionally, they justify rationally. So as excited as someone can be about a product like a champion, someone in the organization is going to be the wet blanket and is going to be like, well, what else have you looked at? How much does it cost? When do we get the payback? What are, what makes this company unique? All these questions. And so you have to build that case. And the champion deck or the business case are great ways to arm your champions so that they can take their emotion and excitement and speak with rational thought to those people.
Yeah. Man, all right. So planning, know your customer, multi-threaded, multi-champions, know when to bring in your execs, and then have the business case and be building that value the whole way through. Doug, thank you so much for joining
My
us.
pleasure. Thanks, guys, for having me. That's
This
awesome.
needs to be on repeat. If you're listening, you got to listen to it at least 3 times. That's the homework because this is so good. So thank
Or
you
do we
very
just slow it down? Do we just put it at 0.5 speed? Can you do that?
Yeah, exactly.
You can take notes. I know, Griff, you're not fast on the note taking.
That's why I record it. That's why I got this recorded. I'll
That's
just have
great.
AI spit out a summary, and I'm on
Yeah.
my way. Come on,
Awesome.
21st century, 2024. Here we go.
Awesome.
Thank you, Doug. We appreciate
Thank you, Doug.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Doug, thanks for joining us on today's episode. One of the key takeaways I had was business value isn't just one moment in time, but it's actually something you do throughout the entire sales process. And even better news, it's not something you have to master. You just get to be curious as a seller. Go back to the basics of why you started in sales. Don't overthink things. Simplify it like Doug talked about, and just get curious with your customers and with your prospects. And then put those inputs along the way as you're building that value. So again, Doug, thanks for joining us. If you're not already following Doug, be sure to check him out on LinkedIn. He posts a lot of great content. So until next time, thanks for listening to the podcast. Take care.